Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Become a Project Manager podcast. My name is Mauricio from Yesi Education, and today we're going to talk about a question that we get asked all the time from many of our students all over the world, which is how do they land their first job in project management after they completed their training, their education, their certifications? How do I get started? How do I land that first job when I don't have any practical experience in project management? And I can certainly relate to this and understand the concern. Many people have the anxiety, not knowing where to go first, how to get started, and all of those things that go through your mind. But before we get into what you can do, I do want to bring something to your attention just for awareness, and so you bring this back to earth, right? And the first thing is nobody is born with practical experience in any role, in any field, or in any industry. And by that I mean, when you are a project manager, let's say you're a senior project manager that has 10 years of experience, or 5 years, or 15 years, it doesn't really matter. The point I'm trying to make is that person that today has 10 years of experience, 10 years ago didn't have any experience, any practical experience. And just like you right now, that person at some point had to go through the process of getting their first job in project management. And this is important for you to understand because, like I said, we get asked, and I personally get asked this question all the time. And it seems like people, for some reason, think that people always had years of experience, practical experience in project management, and that they've always been a project manager. Well, the reality is everyone starts from scratch. Nobody starts with having, in their resume, X amount of years of practical experience in project management. At some point, everybody starts at the same place, which is you don't have any practical experience. You might have completed an online course, training, or certifications, and now you need to get your first job in project management. And getting that first job in project management doesn't really differ and isn't really different from getting any other job. The difference is you have to take a couple of things into account. For instance, you have to align your expectations with reality. And by that I mean, for example, why would you apply for a role in project management, a senior project manager role, when you're not a senior project manager, right? You are a senior project manager. You become a senior project manager when you've had many years of industry, in practice, real world, practical experience as a project manager, right? So obviously that's off the table for you. Unless, of course, you're the odd example that, your dad owns the company or someone from your family owns the company or something like that, where they might appoint you as a senior project manager even when you don't really have the practical experience or the years of experience to actually be a project manager, a senior project manager. But of course, that is an infinite minority of people, right? So let's not talk so much about that case, but talk about what the average Joe, most people go through. So like I said, if you're just starting out as a project manager, it doesn't really matter that you have a ton of degrees or a ton of certifications, or you've gone through many online courses or face-to-face project management education, even at a university. It doesn't really matter that you have all of that, let's say, theoretical or education when you're trying to land the job. And by that, I don't mean to convey that isn't important. It is important, of course, very important, incredibly important. That is the first step in you setting yourself in the path to landing your first job as a project manager. What I'm trying to say is you can't really have the expectation of landing, a senior project manager role with a massive salary when you're just landing your first job as a project manager. So that's why I said, let's bring this back to reality and what happens in practice, okay? So of course, if you're just starting out in your role of project manager, you should be applying for junior project management roles or project management roles where there is little to no level of experience required, right? And you might be asking yourself, well, who does that? Who hires someone who doesn't have any practical experience in project manager to manage their projects? Well, many people do, many companies do. And the reason for this is they might have, for instance, an internship in project management for someone who's just starting out. Or they might have, let's say, a project coordinator role, which is kind of the equivalent of a project manager role, but like kind of like the step before you actually take on a proper project management role. Some companies and some, individuals might assign their role as, or call it, project coordinator when they want to, they might have like a more limited budget or limited level of responsibility, or it's kind of like a smaller role, but it's kind of like a stepping stone into the role of project manager. Or you might get that, let's say, project coordinator role at company A, and then 1 year down the track, you might actually apply for a project manager role at company B. So that project coordinator role, don't see it so much as, oh, but I'm not really a project manager. No, see it as a stepping stone, as an initial step to you actually getting that job as a project manager. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you can't really land a job as a project manager from the get-go. It is possible, but again, you need to align your expectations with market realities. So for instance, you might put forward a cover letter or an application and state that you don't have any practical experience. Let's say they might say, we need a project manager that has at least 1 or 2 years of experience as a project manager. Well, if you're going to apply to that role and you don't have that practical experience of 1 to 2 years, well, say to them, you don't have the practical experience, but you do have the education, the certifications, and you've been managing some side projects on your own, personal projects or something like that, right? You need to sell yourself so that they give you the opportunity, or they at least interview you and you explain to them why you're so passionate about project management and why you feel you're prepared to take on the role, even if you haven't had the formal role as a project manager, right? So for instance, you might be working on a company and not have the role of project manager. Let's say you're a business analyst or whatever role you want to think of. And you can actually say to them that you took the opportunity to lead a project in another company, even though you weren't a project manager per se. And that will showcase practical experience, right? So think about that as well when you are in your current role and you're preparing to shift to a role of project manager. If a project opportunity comes up, be the person that raises their hand and says, hey, I'll take on that project, or I can help lead that project, or I can co-lead that project, or I'm going to be actively involved with that project. Seek learning opportunities from project managers. Try to shadow some project managers, learn from them, ask them questions, try to get involved actively in projects so you can see what happens on the ground when people are working on projects. And generally, regardless of the role that you have, at some point, you're going to be interacting with a project for whatever reason, right? So don't be the guy that sits at the back, or the girl or the person who sits at the back and doesn't get involved with projects. Get actively involved with projects if you're aspiring to become a project manager and if you're aspiring to land your first role as a project manager. Because like I said, you can say, even though I don't have, and you can say this in your application letter and in your interview, even though, let's say, I don't have the experience as being as a project manager per se, I have led many projects at my previous company. I work on this type of projects, give them examples, case studies, talk about what you did in those projects, how you supported the project manager in those projects, and so forth. And of course, mention that you have gone through training, certification, and you have all the knowledge and you're ready to put it into practice. Again, this will help you land your first project manager role. Another thing that you can do is seek volunteering opportunities. So many companies are more flexible when they're looking at volunteers because they might be paying you a lower wage, or they might not be paying you at all, depending on the role, right? So I know this might sound to you, well, what do you mean? I'm not going to lower let's say, the salary expectation I have, or all of this stuff. What I'm trying to tell you right now, when I said you need to bring your expectations back to earth, back to reality, you need to think that you're going to be competing with many other people, some who might have actually that practical experience. So you need to become better at selling yourself than them, So, and this, by the way, goes back to job interview skills and something that we call at Yesi Education the art of selling yourself. And this is a very important skill when you're in the job market applying for jobs and trying to land not just, let's say, a project manager role, but any other role, right? So this is also a call out to you right now that if you don't feel you have very strong interview skills, job interview skills, and you're not very good at selling yourself, well, this is something you also should be doing as part of your preparation to land your first job as a project manager. And we do have, a job interview skills course at Yesi Education, which you can see on our profile on our website. But I'm not trying to say right now that you need to go for that specific course. If you want to find another, training, whether it's another training provider, another online course, or just a YouTube video, whatever it is that you want to find, do it. The point is you need to brush up on your job interview skills and develop that very important skill of the art of selling yourself. This will allow you again to land your first job as a project manager. And going back to those volunteering opportunities, seek them out. If you're like, oh, but I can't really stop receiving a salary while I'm doing this, well, then keep your current role and find job opportunities in spaces where you have availability. And that might be a short project, or that might be, doing projects, let's say, over the weekends. You need to find these type of opportunities that allow you to start getting that practical experience so that you can put that on your CV and talk about it at an interview, etc., right? And if you can't find those opportunities, create them yourself. And by create them yourself, I mean start a project, a personal project. Create a website, a side hustle, whatever it is, build something, whatever it is that you do, just put your training, your education into practice so that you can, again, put that practical experience on your resume. And when you're at job interviews, you can talk about a project that you worked on. And it doesn't matter even if it's a personal project or a family project, like I mentioned. The point is you have gone through practical, real-world application of what you learned, and you can put that on your CV as practical experience, as real-world experience that you can talk about also at a job interview. All of these, techniques that we're talking about will help you land that first job as a project manager. So we've talked about volunteering opportunities. We've talked about applying for project management entry roles such as project coordinator, junior project manager, or project manager where the level of experience required for the role is minimum or very low. So it might be just, a year or less, or at least a year or something like that. Seek job opportunities when the level of experience is not massive, or where you see that companies are flexible with this. An example of this would be startups or small companies. Generally, small companies or startups are more flexible with this requirement that might be harder, or a harder requirement for, let's say, a corporate company or a bigger company, right? A startup might be way more flexible on this because they might have, lower salaries, or they might just be, very techy, very trendy, etc. And they might just be flexible with this type of stuff because they might care more about your character, your enthusiasm, your passion, all this stuff, your intellectual curiosity. They might place higher value on those skills and on those competencies than on, let's say, quote unquote, practical real world experience as a project manager. So seek those opportunities, like I mentioned before, where you can have the flexibility from the hiring company, from the employer, on your practical experience, on your years of experience. If you do this, like I mentioned, if you do and you put into practice all of these things that we're talking about in this episode, you will definitely land your first job as a project manager. And don't worry, your first job is not your last job. It doesn't mean that you have to stick with a low salary or entry-level role for your entire career as a project manager. Of course not. And don't get me wrong about any of that. Like I said before, this is just a stepping stone in you getting that practical experience and that, just first step into a project management role, which you can then reference, for your next job application, your next, career move. And now you might be wondering, well, how can I find those entry-level job opportunities or volunteering opportunities or so forth. Well, look for them where you would normally look for a job in your particular location. Each country, each city, each market has its own platform website where people look for jobs, right? So go to those websites, those applications, those platforms, and filter. And if they don't have a filter for level of experience, which many don't, well, then just start browsing and start looking, going through the job ads, the job opportunities that you see out there. And if you see that they're looking for a senior project manager, discard it. Don't even look at that. Just focus on low or entry level roles or low requirement roles in terms of the level of experience, so that you can actually apply and have a real shot at the job, at getting that job. Okay. Now, another technique, another option, which we haven't talked about, is recruiters, right? And by this, I mean, go and talk to some recruiters in the space, in the industry where you want to get that role as a project manager, and talk to them honestly about your situation and about where you're at. Many recruiters are trying to find project managers to fill in, vacants that are in many companies, right? So talk to them and say to them, what we've been talking about. I have transferable skills. I have all of this training, all of this education. I've worked on these projects on my own or at the company that I was at, where I didn't have the role per se as a project manager, but I led many projects. I worked on X, Y, Z projects, delivered this, supported the project manager with this, or assisted while the project manager was on leave and took on the role as a project manager for a month or two, whatever it is. Talk about all of this stuff so that the recruiter can see how interested you are and what you bring to the table, all the value that you can bring, all the value that you can provide at a very reasonable and affordable price, because you're just starting out. And they will, again, help you out in seeking and trying to match you with the right job opportunity. So don't get me wrong. I don't want to convey in this episode that it is super easy to land your first job as a project manager when you don't have practical experience in project management. Of course, it isn't easy, but don't get me wrong either. It isn't impossible. And like I said, whenever you're going through challenging times in this process of landing that first job, just remember what I said at the beginning. Nobody is born with 10 years of project management experience. Nobody is born with 15, 20 years or 5 years of project management experience. Everybody starts out how you're starting out, with zero practical experience and with that hunger, that interest, that passion in getting into the field and landing that first job. So don't let anybody, bring you down or bring your motivation or deviate you from your goal of starting your career as a project manager. Regardless of what obstacles come your way, remember what I mentioned before, keep moving forward, keep working towards your goal, and you will land your first job. Persevere, have discipline, have patience, and focus on what we've talked about in this podcast episode, and you will land your first job as a project manager. All right? So I really hope that you found this helpful and that it helps you in your goals as a project manager and in landing that first job. And when you land that first job, be sure to, comment here in the podcast episode or share the good news, or let us know if you want to do an interview, and we can talk about your experience and how you did it and where you're at and all that stuff. I'm sure it will be really interesting for many others to listen to your experience as well in landing that first job as a project manager. And we, of course, welcome, anyone who is listening, who is interested in talking to us about their experience. We'd love to talk to you about it. All right. So again, this podcast was brought to you by Yesi Education. I'm Mauricio. I'm part of the team, and it was great having the opportunity to talk to you about how to land your first job as a project manager. And we'll see you on the next episode. And remember, if you're enjoying this podcast, make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to your podcast. And make sure also to consider going premium if you're not already one of our premium subscribers, because if you go premium on our becomeapm.com subscription, you'll be able to access not only premium episodes on the podcast, so paid episodes, but you'll also be able to access many other things as well. All right, guys, And of course, don't forget to leave a 5-star review, if you're enjoying the podcast as well. This also helps us and helps many other people find the podcast and learn like you all of this valuable information and education that will also help them in their journey as a project manager. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers. Bye.